Hello and welcome to the East Lampeter Township public meeting. All participants are now informed that this meeting is being recorded. This meeting is also being offered virtually utilizing Zoom, which is a cloud-based platform for remote video and audio conferencing. The Zoom application is free to the public. The general public is therefore able to join the meeting by connection through the internet or by calling in by phone. The public is also able to observe the meeting on the township's YouTube channel. Please continue to check the Township website calendar for any updates related to these public meetings. Agendas for these public meetings will also be available on the Township's website. Please be reminded that this meeting is being video and audio recorded and will be posted to the Township's YouTube channel for viewing. The meeting will now proceed with the chairman calling the meeting to order and identifying all other members present in the meeting room and those joining the meeting via Zoom. The chairman will then confirm those members joining by Zoom can be heard.
Mike, can you hear us?
Okay, now can you hear?
Great. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Welcome. Okay, I'll just give a quick meeting call to order. Chairman Corey Meyer. In the room, we have Supervisor Dave Buckwalter, Supervisor and Vice Chair John Blowers will be here around 5:20. Supervisor Ethan Demi and Supervisor Glenn Eberly. We also have staff here to help assist with the budget, answer questions. Thank you all for being here. And Mike, thank you for being our sole guest. We have no one else in the room. So thanks for joining. Okay, next on the agenda, we have the pledge to the flag. Please. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, next on the agenda, we have public comment for non-agenda items only. Is there any comment for any public comment via email or? Nope.
No.
Nope. Okay. Okay, moving on the agenda, we have the 2022 budget workshop. Am I passing this off to Hutch?
Welcome to do that. If that's
Sure.
a good way to start. I
Sounds
am
good.
happy to try to kick things off and help. As you said, all the township department heads are here to assist the board with any questions or to help with the presentation materials. So initially, I just wanted to point out that this meeting was advertised as a public meeting. And so it is open to the public. I was just going to say that, looking forward to 22, the past couple years have sort of presented a different set of challenges for everybody. And, township operations haven't been any different. So in my view, our staff has done very well to manage the issues related to the pandemic while continuing to focus on public safety issues that are the core of our service mission. We've also worked to support well-planned development activity and special initiatives unique to East Lampeter, such as the Walnut Street extension and the Lancaster Heritage Pathway planning. We expect both of these new facilities to be under construction next year. Our efforts toward Lincoln Highway streetscape implementation have also been continuing. Parks development and improvement, regional recreation program development. The Bridgeport area plan was completed. And we're looking forward to additional cooperative planning efforts with county planning on Old Philadelphia Pike corridor and our other planning partners. I would say through the dedicated efforts of the entire township staff, township operations were maintained throughout the COVID pandemic adjustments. Expenses were carefully monitored as revenues fell. Distribution of CARES Act funds from the county helped to bridge the gap, but it took more than that to maintain operational standards. We're also continuing to face the challenges related to cleaning our local waterways through the MS4 program and related pollution reduction projects. The community has provided the resources needed through the Sewer Authority's adoption and implementation of the stormwater fee, which will fund these required activities for years to come. Your township staff also continues to work to improve the core services provided to the community while managing the new and additional demands placed on local government by new state, federal laws, regulations, and court decisions. Increasing levels of examination of police response present daily challenges to that noble profession. The body camera program that will be implemented in the near future is somewhat in response to these pressures. We expect that this program will help demonstrate the professionalism and caring that our officers exhibit on every shift. In 2022, we will engage in collective bargaining negotiations with both the Police Officers Association and our non-uniformed ASME bargaining unit for new agreements that will begin 1/1 of 23. We will continue to confront challenges in maintaining our community-based volunteer fire service, and we'll spend 2022 working with our volunteers to hopefully find solutions. We look forward to economic activity which more closely resembles pre-pandemic activity, perhaps a new normal that we move into. We're also nearing a time when planning and preparation will begin for the 2024 U.S. Women's Open. Lastly, I just say that, East Lampeter's accomplished a great deal in its history. I think positioned well to handle the present day challenges and a lot to look forward to in the coming months and years. So we've prepared a draft budget and have distributed that. Mike, it's here. We'll get it. We'll get a copy of the stack of paperwork to you somehow, whatever works best for you.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. I did put together a list of what I thought were sort of the critical items that staff needed direction from the board. So I didn't put together what I've put together in the past couple of years as far as a narrative, because I just felt like there was too much that needed to be decided first.
That's fine.
So the first things that I thought, were the most impactful really would have to do with staffing decisions. But I outlined them sort of going through the various funds that we have and by department. So if you're comfortable going through it that way, we'll proceed in that way. So as far as the discussion items that are listed in the general fund, in the administration department, we did add a reception position that was added this year in 2021 as a temporary, but will become a township employee in 2022. So that's included in the budget. We're planning to increase the pay rate for our IT support specialist to begin an adjustment toward market conditions, from a level which we think is just well below market conditions. It needs to be increased. We would expect a full adjustment to take place over a number of years, probably 3 or 4 years. The post-retirement health benefit that we have for employees, we've funded over the years by making transfers from the general fund into our OPEB fund. And that was skipped the past couple of years because of conditions with the pandemic. And we're proposing in the budget to resume annual funding for that future liability of $200,000 this year. We're also looking at converting to a trust to generate additional investment income. And just would note that a portion of this, because of Upper Lake Huck's participation in paying for police services, they pay a portion of the OPEB obligation as well. So that's one of the bigger items, to make a decision on as well.
Can you give more context to the conversion to a trust?
Sure. So right now, we just hold those funds. Is that an obligate account? Kevin?
Correct. So low interest, pretty low interest, 0.04. Something. Yeah.
Very low.
Trust you can invest in.
Correct. And
Stock funds.
right. And the idea of the trust really is that, and it's been the idea of why we set up the OPEB fund originally, was to obligate those dollars to pay just for those future benefits. One of my apprehensions about putting it in a trust is that once you do that, it's locked in.
Exactly.
You can't
Right.
use it for anything else.
Yep.
So we have been exploring with the solicitor's office if there are ways to create a trust which doesn't quite create that much of an obligation, but at least so far from what I've heard, it's, once you set up a trust,
Yeah.
it has to at least go through when all those benefits are paid out. And then if there's anything left over, then you can transfer those dollars. So I think that's the way it'll be.
Probably
Ultimately,
through
it's
some probate process.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the OPEB's not going away unless.
Well, ultimately it is.
That's true. Right?
We've,
There's
we've,
time.
we've
Yeah,
negotiated that benefit out
Right.
for newer employees. So ultimately it will go away, but that's.
So
a
then
number
it's
of
an
years.
actuarial calculation, because you likely don't have to put it all in the trust. You can put the amount in the trust to, and then keep some in the obligate account to manage the next couple of years,
That could be an option that we could look at. So yeah, we have had, Kevin did calculations. We had those reviewed by the actuary, to identify what the liability is for those benefits. So we're trying to get those funded. There's how much in that account right now, Kevin?
A little over 2 million.
Yeah, and currently we're not using it for any retirement benefits. It's
Nah.
just sitting there.
Right. Probably the first that maybe it would be used would be 2023.
I mean, are there other investment options other than obligate that we don't have to full trust for? And you don't have to answer now. Is that something that we either looked into, or is there a quick answer to?
We can look into that, try to get some feedback.
None that I'm aware of. Most of the folks who have an OPEB fund do put it into a trust. So that's pretty normal. It's a matter of dialing in what you're very confident you're going to spend,
Right.
and then bringing that
Not
amount
over,
in.
right.
So holding back some if we're unsure of the utilization rate, that makes sense. But we have enough to put into a trust where we can start to see some benefit to the cash sitting there.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. The next item I made note of is our fire apparatus replacement fund deposits. We've again traditionally been funding future fire apparatus replacement costs, and the township's share at this point in time is 60% of each of those pieces as they come up. And we have not done those deposits over the past couple of years. So we have included in what you have $300,000 transfer from the general fund into the fire apparatus replacement fund. There are no purchases planned for next year. So the next one that is on the list is Bird Hand in 23.
Which they pushed off. to
They
23
did.
From 22.
Uh,
Even sooner.
No, I think it was 22.
Okay. Okay.
So again, a fairly big number in there. The next section is related to police department items and the big issues there. Chief, you want to talk about those?
Sure. In the budget, you will see provisions for the request of a 39th officer, full year salary and benefits. This particular position, I've made mention of before in the past to use as a buffer so that I can move a an officer from the patrol division over the detective division to prepare for 2 retirements that we are anticipating there in 2023 and another in 2024. Both detectives have signed the drop, so they are locked into those dates. And due to the extensive training and feet getting wet period, if you will, it would be beneficial to have that person over there before we actually lose 1 or more of those detectives to retirement. That 39th position could be reduced back down to a 38th position in the future once they are both retired, if the board would so select to do so, or it could be retained, and if it was, then that would be the opportunity to put our MICSAP officer back onto an individualized rotation to be doing commercial vehicle inspections on a more full-time basis. The other thing, salary-wise, that you will see is the addition of 2 community service aides, 1 full year and 1 half year. These would both be new positions to the agency. They would be support staff, non-sworn support staff to primarily to the patrol division. They would be used to pick up those calls, those duties and responsibilities that uniformed officers are currently doing, but wouldn't require a uniformed officer to do. The trade-off for the department and the township is that these individuals would be paid less than a uniformed officer would be, supporting the patrol division. So it's lessening the burden that they currently have and therefore staving off potential need for growth due to call volume or other responsibilities. Both those positions would be full-time, and they would be also staggered in terms of their shift assignment. So they won't both be working at the same time to get the most coverage. There is a note on there for the increase, the $35,000 increase for professional liability insurance. I just spoke to Kevin about that earlier, and the township was advised that this is an increase that not just East Lampeter is facing, but probably most municipalities. So that bump, significant bump, almost more than doubling, is the reason for that.
That's an increase in a premium and not necessarily coverage, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And the final thing on there is the purchase of 3 new vehicles in 2022 at that proposed dollar figure of $139,440. While we're speaking about that, I think it's very important for the board to know that we also had budgeted for 3 vehicles in 2021, of which we have only received 1, and that was the Ford. The 2 Dodges we have not received, and we haven't to this date received any word on when those vehicles would go back into production. So we are very likely going to end up getting through this year and not having those cars. The question will be then going into 2022, where this money was slated to buy 2 Dodges and 1 Ford, as to whether or not we actually continue going down that path when we don't have the Dodges from current year. If the decision were made to not buy Dodges at all and to replace the 2 Dodges that we currently have on order and the 2 Dodges that would be part of the 3-car order for 2022, and get all Fords, the difference in that dollar amount is $41,050 additional.
Mm-hmm. So the Dodges are sedans, the Fords are SUVs.
Correct.
Okay. And the Ford you mentioned was the Ford F-150 or whatever for the commercial truck inspection. That's on a Ford.
That was, yes, it was a
It's
Ford,
Ford.
but that was a 2020 purchase.
Oh, that was 2020.
Yeah, the
Wow.
2021 is a Ford Explorer,
Okay.
and it's currently being upfitted.
Okay.
We don't have it on the street yet.
Okay.
But
Just back to the community service aids real quick. The other expense, are there other expenses for them? First of all, for them, we've had conversations. I think it's a great concept. Do they need vehicles? Do they need some sort of uniform? Do they need
yes,
other stuff?
yes, and the dollar figure that you're seeing includes that,
Okay.
with the exception of a vehicle.
Okay.
They'll need a vehicle, but
Yeah.
we don't need to buy a vehicle. We don't need to think about that right now at this point. They could use a vehicle that we would intend to retire possibly.
Yeah.
And we keep on for an extra year and just
Sure.
keep on the insurance.
Yeah.
But that does include uniforms for them.
Okay.
It does include a ballistic vest for each one
Okay,
of them.
good.
And the reason for that, just so you know, we're going to, eventually when they're out in a car, they're going to be out in a vehicle that is in some way, shape, or form identifying them with the township.
Right.
It's not going to be a police car.
Yeah.
But they're going to be going to calls that policemen have gone and women have gone to
Right.
before. So I don't want to put them in harm's way without having the opportunity to have that protection, even though those calls,
Right.
99 times out of 100 would not
Right.
have any harm to them.
Will they have body cams?
Not yet, not yet. And that would be the one thing, because we're just putting those on
Yeah.
the street, that
Yeah.
wouldn't have been included
Sure.
here
Yeah.
when I wrote this up.
Okay.
But it would include radios.
Okay. Good. Yeah, I mean, I'm concerned about the number of detectives that are all gonna be, a ton of knowledge retiring. So, I'm definitely supportive of, having that buffer. I think you need to tell us, I mean, do we need to hire up one more to create that, even a better buffering of detectives? I'm assuming at least one patrol officer will go to detective. Do you believe two will go in the next 2 years, essentially?
Yes. So one patrol officer is going January 1st,
Okay,
2022.
Yep.
And my plan is to put a second one over January 1st of 2023.
Okay.
The first one is to prepare for a March departure in 23. And the second one in 23 to prepare for a May departure in 24.
Okay.
That gives them a full 12 months plus a
Yep.
couple of months to get acclimated.
Yep. Okay, well, that sounds good. Good plan.
So, yeah, we'll have the same conversation next year this time.
Yeah. Other questions from the board? I think we should sort of like did you have anything else for police? Sorry.
Not unless you have questions. I
Yeah.
would be glad to highlight some things, but I don't want to get out of line here.
I'm thinking, I know I've been asking questions. Any other questions for either administration or police department at this point? And then we can you can still ask questions, but at least try to keep going. Glenn?
Is there anything in your budget for those traffic calming signs for the villages? Like you're going 35 or you're going 65?
So we did purchase two of those last.
The mobile ones.
Yes, the mobile ones. We purchased two of those 2 years ago.
Have we looked at the permanent ones that they're mounted? A lot of the villages are going with them, and it really, one of the most frustrating things being a supervisor all these years, and it started from day one, people complaining about speeding. And they expect the police officer to be sitting there all 24/7 every day of the year. That's impossible. But those permanent, like it says, speed limit 45, you're going 65. And then in some of them, even the red and blue lights start flashing. And boy, you see the cars slow right down. It's incredible.
There's no money in this budget for that right now, but it certainly could be something that.
I mean, for the sake of future supervisors, I would strongly recommend
Yeah.
that, because all we hear at these meetings is Whitmer, Bronx, what you guys do.
Oh, yeah, no, I hear you.
They're flying through our village all the time. Where are the policemen at? Why aren't they slowing the traffic down? All that. It's like, our policemen can't be sitting there 24/7. So I don't know if we can sneak some of them in or not, but I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, I guess my question is, I'm assuming the mobile signs are being used nearly all the time. I mean, I see them often.
We have them on a rotational basis, and that's set up through Public Works.
Yep.
And if we don't have a specific complaint for a specific road where we will target, then Public Works has a rotational basis with which to move the signs from, I believe, 5 or 6 different locations.
Okay. So they're essentially somewhere in the township.
Getting used.
They're not
Yes.
sitting in, Public Works building. Right?
That's correct.
Very
Okay.
good.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Glenn. I hear it all the time.
That could be a Fund 4 item
Yeah.
because it's growth.
Yep.
On top of what we have. So that would be a
Yep.
fund with which
Forfeiture
to
fund. Yep.
use that.
Okay. Mr. Gordon has a question. Oh, sorry, Mike.
What are the challenges we face without the new vehicles in service, increased repair cost of the existing vehicles? And any new money is needed for police training, or is that covered in the established police budget?
So regarding the vehicle repairs, yes, I have asked for a $10,000 increase in that due to the length of time that we've had to keep some of the older cars on the road and the added increase in repair costs. But yes, we have seen a definite rise in repair costs, staving off unloading cars that have higher mileage and then having more frequent repairs as a result. So that money has been requested. And then the second question was regarding what again? Training. Yes, you'll see an increase in the training budget of $17,000. Now, part of that training, part of that dollar figure is to keep our in-house training program going. Last year, we used Fund 4 to do the in-house training program, but becoming repetitive would not make that available for Fund 4 usage.
Yep.
But that gives us an 8-hour day with which to cover numerous training items that we need to do beyond our annual mandatory and service training, beyond our 3 times a year weapons training, and beyond the traditional training classes that we send our new detectives and new patrolmen and those type of things through. So there is money there for that. And then also included in that dollar amount is a request for $5,000 to send what would be our first time sending a lieutenant through a command staff training class. The captain went through that 2 years ago, and I thought it might be wise to look for an opportunity if it would present itself to send one of the lieutenants through a command staff training as well.
And the body worn camera, there's training with that as well.
That's covered in-house, but not on the in-house training that you're reading about there, but we're going through that right now. And while we're on that topic, today was the first day that the body cameras were actually out on the street. They weren't out with all officers, but they did hit the street today. And so far, so good.
Good, great. And Mike, for your knowledge, there's, you keep saying Fund 4, that's a forfeiture account, that monies that the police arrest someone and goes to the court system, and then there might be something of value that gets forfeited back to the township.
Okay. I do want to say this past year, was able to just learn a little bit more of the training credentialing that we've done at East Lampeter Township, which in my opinion is the envy of a lot of police departments. I just think we need to keep making, to me, a big deal about that and really get the word out about it. I think that's great.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you, Mike.
the accreditation, which we go through that process, and many things you talked about, it's important to keep up with training and filing and all sorts of other stuff.
Correct.
I were you to say something about Fund 4?
Just as further clarification, we have an officer who's assigned to the DTF, and it's really through his DEA. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I got my letters mixed up. Sorry about that, DEA. And through his efforts and prosecutions, that's where those forfeiture.
Is that the majority of it? Not local?
That's all of it.
That's all of it. Okay, good. Thanks for the clarification. Any other questions for Chief Zerby? Okay, thank you.
If I could have one other
Yes,
thing
please
just to
go.
draw your attention to. 2022 will be the 50th anniversary of East Lampeter Township's full-time police service.
Wow.
So we're hoping to do something to
Yeah,
recognize that.
maybe a new patch, maybe update the, it's great.
Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Touch ambulance, is that back to you?
I guess so.
Okay, go for it. Yeah,
So you didn't have the opportunity to hear a presentation from Bob May, who was supposed to be at your last meeting, but the paperwork that he gave me indicated that part of his presentation was going to be a request for significantly more funding. Our contribution toward LEMSA has been $12,000 the past couple of years, and he's looking for $54,000 contribution next year. I did put in the amount of $36,000. I can't say that there's any great science to that. That's sort of halfway between 12 and 54. But yeah, it's something that, we need guidance from the board on.
Sure.
There.
Comments from the board. Ethan?
I know you're now on the board of LEMSA, so we get a lot more oversight. It was brought up at the LIMC meeting, some concerns of if we're donating additional cash to LEMSA, what's the oversight that we have to ensure those dollars are being spent wisely is the big question. I know we have more insights with you on the board, but is there anything that they're in conversations with allow if townships start contributing more to LEMSA to give us some sort of oversight and visibility in how that's spent?
Yeah, I picked up on that at the LIMC meeting as well. And although my tenure on their board is very short at this point, I would plan to bring forward. The other thing I would say, again, I've only been on the board a short time, but I'm confident they have challenges financially. And the main reason that Bob was proposing this increase was in order to increase pay levels for their people.
Yeah.
However, I do have to say that they do have a substantial amount of money on hand.
Right.
And so
As reserves, you're saying?
as reserves and perhaps designated for future projects of some sort that I'm not aware of yet.
CapEx that they've been saving for?
Perhaps. I need to learn more about that.
Okay.
I mean, that's my sense too. They have a strong, just looking at their 990 online, they have a strong balance sheet. Now, where I think you were going, John, I mean, they're capital intensive. Those rigs are not cheap, kind of like fire or, way more expensive than police cars. So I get it. They also have buildings, throughout.
Yes.
We are lucky to have a substation or whatever you call it on the highway. However, I agree. They have a huge staffing issue in that their pay is low compared to less risky jobs in healthcare and other things that you could get paid more for. I mean, it also goes back, honestly, this IT position, if I could find people to make $46,000 as an IT specialist, I'd probably hire 10 of them. I mean,
You can't find that who will take that.
right. So, we are extremely lucky to have retained the folks in this room, plus your direct reports. But it concerns me when, I'm seeing salaries getting paid throughout the community, either at my organization that I work at during the day or others that I'm familiar with, that I don't know how we're keeping people, honestly. So I'm not helping our budget saying these words, but I'm being honest.
Sure.
I mean, so
I-
John, you're
yeah.
hiring people every day.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
trying to.
trying to. Ambulance.
Yep.
I think we had some conversation, the last meeting. Some of this, Ethan wasn't there, so I appreciate hearing from Ethan on that. I would echo the same comments that Ethan made. I'm fully supportive of increasing our contribution. I think it does need to move. I'd like us to establish, if nothing else, Bob's presentation of what he would suggest on a per capita basis. I'd like us to tie it to something that way. And I know you weren't just throwing it out there, but knowing that he's asking for a certain amount based upon a standard of per capita, and we're going to go to X. Maybe it is to where he's going to, but why are we doing that? Well, because there's a standard, something that we're putting in place, not just because we're throwing it against the wall. And I don't think any of us were saying that. But out of the box ideas. LEMSA has a building that's right across the street from Lafayette's firehouse. I think if we worked really hard, and I think we're going to do that in 2022 with our ESC, I bet there's some space at Lafayette that we could put LEMSA. I'm just throwing it out as an idea that, Whitmer, maybe there's space at Whitmer we could put LEMSA. Is there a way that we could really start to get creative about the way we provide our emergency services, and, start to utilize our assets in a way that one benefits the other. And we can look back at the taxpayers and say, hey, we're actually saving you some money by doing this, but we're also increasing our support of emergency response ambulance. So I think that there are some opportunities. Let's get creative. Let's not, assume that just writing a check for additional support to LEMS is a good thing. Let's layer that on top of something creative. So,
I think alone there's three big sort of themes that I see. The one is, as we look at all of our emergency services, making sure we have the appropriate level of oversight. We do that. We have a great police force, but we have direct oversight over that. We've had this discussion with the Drug Task Force of we can give money, but we have no authority over how that's spent. So ideally, we're responsible to the taxpayers. If they don't like how a service is getting provided to them, they go to who's taking their money and they complain to them. And if we say, well, we gave it away, we don't know. It's just called taxation without representation. So as long as we have that oversight over how the money's spent, I think all of the board is very committed to supporting our emergency services, fire, police, EMS. Ideally, the county could step up a little more, but in the absence of that, I think LEMS is looking. So once you get past that piece, it becomes, all right, we've got immediate short-term problems, both in fire and in EMS. And we've got long-term structural issues. I know John's working with ESC on long-term solutions for the fire and looking at EMS. I know the LEMS board is looking at the long-term, but in the short term, we're going to have the same conversation a little bit further down on the fire funding. But I think we need to take a look at what is that short-term shot in the arm they need to get to buy the next 12 to 24 months to get to where there's a long-term solution. And the question I would have is 36,000 enough? And should we look at moving a little higher in this year's budget? And I'm going to have a similar comment once we get into the fire as well. Then the question will become, how do we pay for it? But I'll save that for once we dig into fire. Once we roll through all this, I think fire is going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Glenn, thoughts on the LEMS conversation?
Well, I didn't realize Hutch is on the board. That's a big plus. We have some oversight. We know how the money's being used. So I'm okay with any of that.
Okay.
What was the per capita that he was looking
So
for?
it was actually the spreadsheet, the end of the spreadsheet actually calculated based on number of calls.
Yeah, it's called
It's call volume. So
better.
yeah, so the spreadsheet, if I recall, had nearly all of the municipalities owing more and one municipality actually owing less based on call ratios. Now, you'll recall 6 or so municipalities pay 0.
Do you have that?
Yeah.
I saw you scrambling through your paperwork there. Thank you, Chuck.
Yeah, so I think the request from LEMS, if I'm not mistaken, it's like 54.
Yes.
Almost 56,000.
56. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's basically it's on the ratio of total 911 calls.
I see. Okay, it's not per capita or anything.
No, I mean, it ends up being,
So yeah, he's stating the annual municipal support is 700,000. He's taking a look at what is our percentage of total 911 calls. And then he's, I guess, sort of taking that out to get to that 55, 9, 26, 71.
I mean,
So,
it's a fair way of calculating that. Yeah, I mean, just as a point of reference, it's saying City of Lancaster would need to give another 177,000 over the 150 they typically have been giving for a total of 327,000. So at this point, I'm comfortable with 36,000. I'm open to additional conversation about it, but why don't we come back to this one after talking about other emergency services?
Yep.
Is that good, Ethan? Yep, with that. Okay. Okay. Hutch, planning zoning or someone else.
Sure. I'll let Colin talk about the planning zoning item that we listed there.
Yes, so the only item I had listed was document scanning. We're hoping to digitize all the property zoning and subdivision files. This will allow staff to have easy, quick, and organized access. Right now, it's all paper files in various locations throughout the building. This also helps in the event that staff would have to work remotely in the future. And we're hoping that, I think, we're pretty positive that the American Recovery Act will cover this cost.
The resulting documents will have intelligence, or will they just be raster documents?
As far as,
In other words, can you scan the words on a document, or will it just be document titles?
it'd be just a PDF. We can list whatever we would like for,
Okay.
yeah, we can put up whatever we want. So.
Will this take everything that's in file cabinets, Colin?
Yes, everything in the back, everything in the lunchroom, everything, all the files out in the main room.
Be searchable files?
Yes,
For the public, online through website?
it will not be available to the public themselves if the right to know request will come in, obviously. But yeah, it'd just be for staff, which again would make it great for us because we can provide that information to the residents quicker.
Okay.
We have quicker access.
Okay. So we'll actually gain significant office space by getting rid of.
It's a real estate investment.
Real estate investment. I'm thinking we could rent property to get this back.
And we
so-
do all that for $28,000.
Yeah.
You can't get
Sounds-
that kind of space for 20.
Yeah. Holy cow.
Thank you, Colin. Anything else?
That was it.
Okay, Public Works Department, see you, Charlie.
Just a quick question
go
I have
please.
on that. Do you know if we can get rid of the paper documents or?
Actually, they'll be scanned as a PDF-A document, which is required under the law in order to throw out the paper copies. So that's the only way we can throw them out, if they're a PDF-A.
What does that mean?
I
PDF-A.
honestly don't know.
Just
Slightly.
Just
bigger.
a specific type of format.
And so your assumption about space is
Yeah,
correct.
yeah.
We're going to be able to get rid. I wasn't sure whether we were going to have to hang on to it for a period of time, but
Yeah.
thanks for that clarification.
Now, all that is cloud storage too. So this 28,000 to do the document scanning at a one-time annual?
Yeah, it's a one-time fee for all the,
Yeah.
scan all the files.
Yeah. So do you remember what our cloud storage will be? Don't know.
Actually, the documents will all go on to MyGov under each property.
So it's in-house, basically.
Backed up somewhere.
It's got to be back. Yeah, it's
Right,
back.
Right,
A
absolutely.
couple places.
Backed up somewhere in the Midwest.
Okay,
If there's offsite
okay,
for ICO.
great. Thank you.
Okay,
Public Works.
Public Works, Charlie.
Okay, looking to add additional staff to one new public works person. I look back through the records, the last time we hired somebody was 2014 to take us to 12 employees. That person's planned to be in the Parks Department, basically Public Works Department, be able to work wherever. This is to help with the additional park property we purchased. All the MS4 projects we've done with stream bank maintenance that we need to do anymore. So that's the request for that. Asking for our 2 part-time seasonal mowers to come back. It's been 2 years since we had them. We've been doing it with in-house staff, which takes away 2 people from 2 different departments, which is leaving us shorthanded in the meantime. Radio purchase, we're looking into purchasing the new radio. Well, we did purchase the other year, the new radio system the county's on. We're finding some of the walkie-talkies that we have will not go out through steel and stuff in our heavy equipment. So we're looking for mounted radios in those pieces of equipment. 3 each year. I think we need another year or 2, and then we'll have everything fitted. Our tractor purchase, right now, our when I say tractor, it's our roadside mower. It's a 2009. It has a little over 3,700 hours on it at this point. The guys do a definite good maintenance. We did put close to $15,000 into it about a year ago with the transmission issues with it. Just doing some quick calculations to put out there. We'd like to hold on to this one due to the investment we have in it. If we get the other employee, it'll give us another piece of equipment for plowing in the winter. Help with snow removal. But at this point, when we get to use this tractor, 3 departments try to use it. So everybody's trying to adjust their schedules. Between the spring and summer, it's spring, summer, and fall is 17 weeks we use this one tractor. And if something falls through for one guy, he can go do this. But if somebody else is already using it, it's set up for either a rear flail or a roadside mower. The new tractor would come with all this equipment. There is some trade-in value for some of the equipment we wouldn't need with the old. Kind of counterbalances if we could trade the old tractor in. Last thing on my list was the community park parking lot. We put that in the budget, I think, 2 years ago to try to get all the parking lots in sync with paving, putting top in. We're thinking multiple people driving into the grass and stuff. That's the reason for the curb. There'd be curb cutouts where the walking paths are. Any drainage, we're looking at the drainage issues if we'd have to add some storm sewer. But that parking lot is in bad shape. I think since I've been here, the only thing we've done there was painted lines. And that's about 17 years. So it's held up. But like I said, we're trying to get that on the same rotation as the other ones.
Yeah.
Okay, questions for Charlie?
You said it'll be 12, that'll make 12 full-time, Charlie?
It would take it to 13.
13.
Yeah. So back in 2014, we went from 11 to 12.
Okay.
That's not counting me.
And then 2 part-time.
The 2 part-time we had 2 years ago would be about 24 hours a week, 3 days, mowing all the parks, this property here. Just bringing them guys back. I've already spoke to them. Are they still interested? And they said, whenever you can smell. So they're out there. Like I said, that was taken from 2 different departments and shorthanding the other guys. So schedules was hard to make with losing guys. I mean, if it rained, yeah, you had your full staff, but then you can't do your outside work.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Charlie.
Colin mentioned the American Recovery Act during the planning and zoning document scanning. Hutch, at some point, you're going to, Kevin, tell us what can be used for American Recovery Act, or we don't know. I know we don't, maybe guesses of what we possibly could use it for.
Yeah.
Oh, you have it down later. Got it.
Yeah,
I
a
see
little
it.
bit later.
Okay, that's
um,
that's fine.
We're hoping for some more and better guidance
Yeah,
than what
sure.
we've gotten, but
Yeah.
we have a few ideas we've been kicking around.
Okay, that sounds
Okay.
good. Any other questions for Charlie? Okay. Mike, did you have a question? I'm sorry. No? Okay, no, okay, cool. Okay, library.
Library, I was just trying to look up what we've been contributing to library in recent years. I think it was 36 or 38,000.
We were about there. I mean, just as a,
Bumped it up
when
to
I
40.
first came on, was when we switched to doing the funding formula based off usage, and then we also started doing some increases. At the time, my proposal was the library always asked for $5 per head per capita, and I've always said we should try to shoot for half of that from us, and then rely on the community to fundraise or donate. Which is why I ask them every time to see if they'll give us how much they raise from East Lampeter, and they don't know. Nor do they want to share where their donations come from either. So if we get up into that 40, 42 range, I think we're good. I think we're at 38 right now.
37.
37.
37.
So little increase is good. But I think we're getting close to where at least I think our objective should be. I like the idea on some of these things, whether it's EMS or library, starting to set an objective and saying over a certain amount of time, we can get to, here's our funding based off of either what's a key metric, is it 911 calls, is it per capita, and start to set a target for some of these as opposed to sort of figuring out how much we want to donate.
So you said the library has said their per capita would be 5.
That's what that's the number they throw out as the recommendation from, I think, the American Library Association.
Right.
As far as local funding.
Yeah, and from Lancaster Library's perspective, they want all 5 of those dollars. So we've been spreading it around to the top usage locations for our residents. So
which in this year, I think they sent the numbers. We actually have 4 that are pretty close. So we may want to look at either bringing in that 4th one. I mean, Lancaster Public Libraries is 30 to 40%, depending on which metric you're looking at, either cardholders or usage. They're still the top one, but it's pretty evenly split between the top 4.
Is that for in that top 4?
No, it's for East Lampeter residents. Usage is LPL, Manheim Township, Heckway Valley Library System, which is 2 branches, and Strasbourg High School.
That's right. They always gone.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think a lot of the usage has shifted to those, especially in 2020, and it hasn't gone back to the city in 2021.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to take a look at those numbers again.
Yeah.
All that.
That works.
So that would be the total amount for all the libraries that we would split up.
If I remember correctly, 8 years ago, I think we were only donating about 12,000 to the library system.
Yeah, the board's made significant improvement there. Those are all the general fund items that I had listed as decision points, but obviously fire service is in there. If you want to talk about fire service, the financial plan that we had done several years ago called for a 2% increase in the basic contribution to fire service increase every year. That is included in the draft budget, 2% increase. We're still anticipating paying for the insurance on their vehicles, the fuel related to running the vehicles, the oil dry materials. We shifted those over into the Stormwater Fund since that's more or less addressing water quality issues. So that is still paid for by the township, just out of stormwater rather than general fund. I think those are all the different things that were plus the apparatus fund as that's set up. The other alternative with the apparatus fund, of course, is financing those obligations, as they come up. But that's a choice. So
good.
If there's something in particular that you want to review or talk about there, we can do that now.
Let's do that.
Yep. I think the big one is we've got almost $1 million budget gap between our expenses and our revenue. So we need to look at plugging that. Some of these, all the increases we've talked about, there's not a whole lot that I've heard as we look at this. It says, all right, this is for sure going away next year from an expense side. When I look at the revenue side of this, there's some tweaking around the edges of, I think we could increase our estimate for what we're going to get for certain numbers of these. But again, we're only talking, I can only come up with maybe about 100,000 in there. And we've got some little things we could push, but having listened to all of this, there's not a whole lot on the expense side. We're spending where I think we should be spending. We're looking at, but when I know John's got more insight in emergency services, we look at what we've spent historically over the last 7 years. We've increased our funding for apparatus fire companies. We've increased our funding for fire companies, and I feel like we're still sort of treading water as far as what our needs are. So I think we have a short-term problem, which is going to be funding, but then our long-term problem we still need to look at. So when I look at this, we're currently spending, and then through the pandemic, we delayed 2 years, which is about $600,000 in funding into that apparatus fund. And some of the fire companies delayed purchases, but we've got some big apparatus purchases coming down the pike, which some of the fire companies may not have the ability to fundraise the other half of. So I think we need to start, in my opinion, I think we need to start looking at how do we look at an apparatus fund that funds up to 100% of all of the fire companies' apparatus. And then how do we start to move in that direction? So I'm not saying we need to jump into that right now, but look at that. What's the apparatus requirements over the next 10 years? And how do we start to move our contribution into that? And then we've got on top of that additional funding that still may be required to maintain the level of service that our residents expect with the fire companies. So if you look at what we're spending now, which is approximately $300,000+ in fire spending, plus another $300 in donate contributions of the apparatus fund, and that's only covering half of the apparatus. And we've got 2 delayed payments. Ideally, we can maybe use some recovery money to help plug some of those funds holes that we kicked off in the last couple of years, and maybe go and backfill those. I think that would be a good, wise use of those funds. But I think we need to look at maybe a dedicated source of funding for the fire. So one of the options there would be a fire tax or just an increase in the millage rate. Fire tax has a couple additional advantages. I used to not be a fan of one, but having dug into it more, it's a little stickier. And it's similar to what we talked about with the OPEB. You've got, with an OPEB, that once you go into a trust and you've got a dedicated piece, we lose flexibility. But for the folks who rely on that money, they like that we lose flexibility. And similarly with the fire tax, we could very quickly adapt and not pay $600,000 into an apparatus fund, which we did. But the folks who rely on that apparatus funding start to go, that was real easy. You can also do that if it's a dedicated source of funding, but that funding now is required to, all right, if you have a fire tax, that funding is required to go into the fire services. It's not at the board's discretion to just quickly move that funding around. So giving that level of peace of mind to the community as well as the fire companies, I think would be worth looking at. So if we've got $1 million budget hole, we already know what we have in fire spending. We could look at a fire tax that would cover our current fire spend. And then we have the long-term plan of, all right, we may have to increase that fire tax as our contributions to fire companies go up over the next couple of years. So that's my, as I dug through this, which would be almost like a 0.3 mil fire tax would get you that 600,000. One of the problems or the difficult structural problems we have in our revenue producing capabilities in East Lampeter that our neighboring townships don't have is our assessed value of the real estate is lower. So our percentage of revenue we can get from real estate taxes is lower than our surrounding folks. So what Manheim Township or East Hempfield can get from a property tax increase is a lot higher than what we can get from a property tax increase. The other revenue producing options are already tapped out for us. So we're left with property taxes, and we don't want to have giant ramp ups in property tax. So it's looking at saying, what's the 5-year plan to slowly increase our revenue to cover some of these costs that we know we have now, and we know we're only going to have increases. Because the emergency services piece, whether it's fire, police, or EMS, our fire companies, our police force, we've increased our funding for by almost $300,000 a year since 2017. And those are good dollars we've been spending because the cost of keeping people safe goes up. And it's going up at a faster rate than the revenue producing. So we've raised taxes in the past, both to increase our funding for our police officers as well as our fire companies. But I think the fire and EMS are the two big ones over the next 5 years that I see. We're going to have to make some decisions on how we're going to fund those. So I'd start the conversation now and see where it goes.
Let me just summarize what I just heard from Ethan. So appreciate good, great comments, Ethan, and I don't disagree in general. So, you know, obviously the $1 million shortfall at this point, Ralph, in your presentation, you know, we've got a fairly large expense item that we can address, and that is the ESC, you know, and particularly the apparatus. So I'm hearing short term, can we use some of the federal recovery dollars in the short term? With a question mark next to it, Ralph, obviously. You know, the second short term would be is adopt that fire tax. You know, look at it in the immediate term at about, would you say about 0.3%? Your numbers
0.3 mils gets you about 600,000.
Okay. You know, tagging it to our real estate assessed value, we're about 500,000. Okay, so tie it to that, get about $500,000. Long term, meaning, you know, about a 5 to 10 year time horizon. You know, if we adopt a fire tax, now we've got some room to grow it, and we can look at doing that incrementally over time. You know, we've got companies that are talking to us about falling short, and we're just beginning a process which I'm hoping in the first 6 months of 2022 we can tackle it. You know, I would add to this long term, 5 to 10 years, is looking for ways to reduce the expenses to the taxpayers, at least to the budget. You know, taxpayer contributions through, you know, volunteer contributions, fantastic opportunities. Looking for ways to encourage the fire companies to speak to their communities, but I do think that there has to be a conversation about reducing expenses there. You know, I've been having meetings with 3 of the 4. I've got a 4th one coming up this week, and I've pressed them. I've pressed the companies to say, you know, we as the elective body have to look back to the taxpayers and to prove value to them. Well, you know, if we're going to be, you know, somewhere in the 850,000, add up everything, apparatus, insurance, the gas, everything, it would probably somewhere in that 850,000 average.
600. Yeah, it's about 600, I'd say.
Okay, so, you know, if we look on an average year at $600,000, you know, I think 8 years ago or so, we ran those projections with Matt's assistance, and we were, you know, saying if we were replacing that with a paid staff running 3 8-hour shifts, you know, we were going to be pressing north of $850,000. Matt, almost $1 million is what Matt.
Yeah,
I think Matt ran that. Right?
Yeah, I haven't done that in a while, but it's going to be substantial.
I think in, you know, 9 years ago, it was about $1 million a year. Yeah. So I've said to the companies, look, obviously there's been a savings to the budget from them continuing to be volunteers, but they are expressing concern with, you know, continuing to get the volunteers, the amount of training time and expense that it represents, the cost to raise funds to pay for these vehicles, for these apparatus. And I've pressed back and said, how many apparatus do we need in this municipality? You know, I need them to be taking a hard look in 2022. What do we really need to provide fire services? And I certainly can't support, you know, providing funding to them north of where we'd be if we had a full-time fire service. So you're going to have to prove yourself to the taxpayers for what you're asking and what the return is to the taxpayers for this. So, I'm Ethan, I like your direction you're going with it. But I want to say, I think the ESC needs to come back to the board and say, we've taken a hard look at where we're spending our dollars and what we're asking you to spend on us. And here's what we think it needs to stop. Here's what we think we can ask for and keep doing what we're doing. But if we start asking for more than that, now we're probably costing the taxpayers more. So I'm not sure what it is. They need to speak to us on what they think they can achieve. I also think with help from perhaps someone coming in from outside looking at this in 2022, we may be able to also say to the ESC, here's the limits that we need in Apparatus, guys. Here's what we really need as a community and what we think is worth investing. Does East Lampeter jump to a fire tax? That's your question.
It's we need to fund it in some way. And it's and the only way is through property taxes. The question is whether it's a dedicated stream of revenue that is more visible to the taxpayers that they are funding these things. I think your estimates are going off of what would a paid fire look like are
2012,
significantly off.
2012 when Matt did that, Matt Bono from Whitmer at the time. Who's that Whitmer?
Just look at Manheim Township's cost over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
They instituted their fire tax in 2009 to what it is now, and their cost, which is still, but based on the call volume, you could just run how much is it costing them for their call volume, and we're running about half those calls. So we're talking closer to 5 million. Is that overall cost? My objective would be, how do we preserve volunteer fire companies? And one of those ways is to take that strain off of having to spend all the time doing fundraising for the big purchase items that just keep getting more expensive, and allow them to focus on training, actual community engagement, smaller dollar fundraisers that get that community engagement, which gets you those volunteers. They should focus on the volunteers, the training, that community piece. But again, that's long-term. Short-term, it's one of, we know what our cost is right now, and it will most likely be at minimum going forward. Can we start to fund it that way and also close our budget gap, which is $1 million budget gap?
Do you think a fire tax would then cause any voluntary donations to the fire companies to cease happening? Absolutely.
I think your point, Ethan, have you looked at Manheim Township to see what the impact was of that? Didn't look at it to see.
Well, the data isn't there. So in other words, the data of how typically fire taxes are in response to declining donations and companies not able to fund the apparatus piece. And most folks move to it when they start. We could have been doing this all along. It's just we're currently spending $600,000 a year on fire. The question is, do we want that to be a dedicated source of revenue?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's harder. That gives us less flexibility, but then with that starts to come the potential to increase that if the Emergency Services Committee sees and we have a consultant that looks at different ways to do it. It's stickier, it's more visible, and there is more public oversight for us on it. Right now, the public doesn't know how much we spend.
Right, unless they dig deep and
Sure.
I
Is that 3 mil, Ethan? Is that
0.3?
Is that 0.3? That's the 500,000?
Correct.
So we're about that at this point. 0.3.
Well, yeah,
the equivalent of it is 0.3 at this point.
Yeah, we're spending currently 0.35 mils.
So
our contribution, the overall fire service cost that we do that compilation of everything is over $1 million. The amount is, but I think, if, I guess I haven't really looked at fire tax, how that all works, how we collect it, any of that.
Yeah,
So
it's on the same, it's just another line item on the tax bill. So you have a total rate, and then it's just broken out as, so instead of, so we'd have like a 1.9 mil general fund rate, and then you have a 0.3 mil fire tax rate. We can go up to 5 mils on fire tax.
So I guess where I was going was, if the fire tax at some point in time would, be covering all the expenses, then you're looking at something over $1 million to generate. And I know that the county has reacted toward other things being on that bill badly. So I'd want to explore that to make sure that they would still collect that, or if we have to start doing something different.
Well, there's quite a few folks that do it. So, I mean, the big one for me is this will increase public scrutiny. Right now, you can see the large number of members of the public participating in our budget discussion and seeing how much we're spending on fire service. I think we should have more public engagement on what we're spending on fire. Both from so it's one of, you may have some folks when they see that start to donate a little less, or you might have other folks go, I didn't, through the process, realize I didn't know how much this was actually costing us. Because if our apparatus is only funding half of that, they're still fundraising the other half from the same people. So the money's coming from the same people, so whether it's more uniformly distributed or not.
I think, Glenn, you chimed in and said, you feel it will decrease. I think across the board, when we talk about it at the ESC, I think there's an understanding that it will decrease. They will see their funding decrease. I think there's some resistance from some of the members of the ESC to adopting a fire tax. I think there is definitely support from among some members of the ESC, recognizing at this point that they're falling short on their ability to raise funds to pay for their portion of the apparatus.
There's going to have to be some serious discussion. I guess you're the center of it with the fire companies, because we have some fire companies that are extremely active in the community. We have some that are zero active. So I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm not sure if it's, it's going to have to be some serious discussion before anything's done, because, well, I'll be blunt. If Runks continues on the same road as it did the last 2 years, in 2 years, they won't exist.
Yeah.
So
I think that's what you're suggesting is there's a tough conversation coming with the volunteer fire companies, and they are, Glenn. That's what I'm getting to with them. You just mentioned $1 million a year. Okay, that's where I'm at, recognizing with everything we're putting in, we're north of the 600,000. That's strictly, looking at what we're doing for apparatus.
That's just our line item in our budget.
Just our line item in our budget. And I look at it and I say, I'm not going to 5 million to where township is, and I certainly recognize that we're already spending over the past decade somewhere between 600,000 and $1 million a year. And I'm saying to the fire companies now, we want you to be volunteers. We want to continue to encourage that. We don't want to discourage it, but I also can't sit back and just wait for that to hit us. We've got to, as you're suggesting, Ethan, let's prepare ourselves for where it may go. And if we can encourage it to go in one direction, let's do that. But if they start to lose the steam, we've already got a process and some funding mechanism and a conversation in the community already going in the direction of where it may go.
I'm just looking at $1 million budget hole and saying, here's the money we've already budgeted in the past for fire. Can we start to fund some of what we've already dedicated to this? I think it's going to go up. But the question is one of either you're just raising property taxes or you're raising in a way that forces a conversation in the community about fire services.
Okay. So, stormwater, right? We went down a fee versus a tax because it would hit essentially all property owners, depending on tax exempt or not.
It was more fair.
Yeah. Is there any sort of concept in fire to make it across everyone? And I'm not saying I'm for it right now. I'm just saying, I'm just trying to understand all possible revenue options.
In other states, yes, I don't think there is a mechanism in Pennsylvania in the second class township code to assess a fee based on that.
You know,
I've heard different opinions on fee for service, where, fire company gets dispatched to an automobile crash and then there's billing that goes out
Yes.
for those things. So I've heard of that, and whether that's, it's done in some places, whether you can ultimately collect everything is, I think, a disputed issue. But I'm not aware of any other mechanism.
and the difference between the fee and the tax was a
So there's some exempt, tax exempt properties
Yeah.
in the community, so they would be affected by a property-based tax, like the fire tax would be.
and we were trying to capture all of that when we did the sewer.
The stormwater,
fee, stormwater fee. We were trying
Correct.
to capture all of those.
right. They have a lot of impervious areas.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
So, John, more comments?
I guess I was hoping not to have that conversation going into 2022. I was hoping to have it coming out of 2022 based upon what I think is the hardcore reality that we're going to discuss at the ESC. So I didn't want to begin the year recognizing that there are some who have concerns about putting in place a fire tax and driving all their private sector donations away. There's been talk of that.
Because, and this is sort of the rebuttal to that, which is we're spending the same amount of money either way. And so the folks who are afraid that's going to drive away donations are saying, I don't want the public to know that they're already paying the taxes for $600,000 worth of spend so that they'll give me more. As opposed to, I think we should be more transparent about how much we are spending for fire. Because we're talking about the same amount. So it's one of, we're either going to look at a tax increase of, essentially, are we going to try to split the difference of this year and try to backfill with some federal dollars and have a similar conversation next year? But it's one of, we do need an increase in revenue. $1 million budget gap is not a sustainable choice. Even though we have the reserves for 1 year, we should start building we need a balanced budget. Or a plan to get to a balanced budget. We can't just keep spending down reserves. So it's a matter of what's then the best mechanism to do that. The other options, we could start to have a conversation, maybe at another board meeting of which one of these and have that in public of get the ESC and firefighter members to come in and give us their feedback on that. I think that would be healthy and helpful. We may end up going with, all right, we're just going to raise taxes this year. Because in the future, we could always institute a fire tax and cut taxes. It's the same pot of, it's the exact same amount of money you're raising. It's just a matter of what are you calling it? And it's more of, are we making a ongoing dedicated stream of revenue? It's the real key question. But I think having the conversation a little more openly, I'd rather have the community involved in that conversation than just us and just fire.
I would rather have us have a discussion about how to close the $1 million gap through a real estate tax increase. And then as the year goes on, do we look at going into 2023, dedicating a fire service tax and perhaps shifting that increase that we put in place this year to that, and then perhaps pulling back on the property tax?
Yeah, Ethan, you mentioned something earlier about going from the current funding ratio for apparatus to 100, moving it to 100%. Talk a little more about that.
When you look at what other townships have done to preserve volunteer fire companies,
So it would take the burden essentially off the fire
You
companies. to-
remove a large amount of the fundraising burden.
Yeah.
And so you focus on training, community engagement, fighting fires, and admin. Sort of the first. Yep. And this is one of getting an outside consultant is good, but there's only so many of them. You can also just go read what that same consultant has written for the other 5 local communities that he's done the exact same thing for. It's going to be very similar, different letterhead. And the first step is going to be fully fund apparatus. The next step is start to move in admin into the township. So once you start fully funding apparatus, then John is correct. You start to look at the spend much more based off of holistically, what exactly do we need to fight fires? Now, what does each fire company want to have? And that's the reality. Once you start spending more government money, there are more strings attached.
Yeah.
But if that's what we need to do to make sure our residents want to make sure that when there's a fire and they call 911, a fire truck shows up as quick as possible. They don't care what color it is. So that's the piece of it. Those are the first 2 steps as you move down that path. But the first one that other folks have done is they've moved 100% funding apparatus.
Another concern, agreed, Ethan. Another concern, Corey layered on top of this. I think if you looked at their call volume, all 4 of our companies, look at their call volume. 80, they, in a conversation this past week, one of them told me 90% are non-emergency calls. So we're funding a significant amount of investment in assets. There's a tremendous amount of training time these individuals are putting in, and 80% of their call volume is non-emergency things. So they've even said, well, maybe we ought to be looking at this in a much different way. Maybe it's emergency response. I think I used the example, the hurricane. I had 5 members of the fire company in my basement for 4 hours with 3 pumps, and they came in a vehicle that was about $400,000 vehicle, all dressed with, tremendous expensive equipment, that they threw it all off and came in their sneakers in my basement just to help me pump out. And we talked about, just what is the need for the community. It's beyond fire, fighting fires. So, maybe there's a better use of the dollars long term in the way in which we handle some of these dollars. I think Ethan summarized both the short term and long term issues are there. I would say to begin the conversation this year with them, I'd like to look at that $1 million shortfall. Could we perhaps put in place a tax increase to pay for it, and then look at the solutions over this next year, and perhaps shift the expenses to the fire tax if that's the direction we went.
Yeah. And some of this is going to come down to guidance from the feds of how we spend recovery money.
Exactly.
Because $500,000 of this is just going out to different funds. If we can use federal money to fill those funds, kick that conversation to the next year. I think we should look at doing that, but that's half of it. The other half would be a modest tax increase to cover that difference. But again, we're going to be coming down on a deadline for advertising, and no guidance from the feds.
Right. Okay. Good conversation. Dave or Glenn, any other comments? Yeah, fire service. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Ethan, for bringing that up. Well, some point during this discussion tonight, we'll talk about revenue. Where are we at? Forfeiture?
Police forfeiture.
Okay.
Chief had outlined a few things, and I put highlights in there for what we plan on doing with some of those funds.
Yeah.
Chief, you want to go over those?
Sure. You'll recall that the money for the impound yard would be a carryover from 2021. That project didn't break ground yet. While the impound yard has not been full, I'll say this year, I still believe that East Lampeter's ability to have a large number of vehicles, and I'll knock on wood, resulting in fatalities or near fatalities has proven to be significant in the past. So I still believe the project is worthwhile. Beyond that, following through that project gives us some very much needed parking spaces to the rear of the building where the old impound yard is. So that's the half funding there, the other half to be funded by the capital reserve. The weapons training simulator, the county of Lancaster has what is referred to as a FATS trainer out at the training center. They've had it for over 12 years. I'm inclined to say it's 15 years old. I don't even know that it's operational anymore, but it's antiquated. No one uses it. And this would allow us to have something similar, but on a much smaller scale that could be used at any point in time by an individual officer or by a collective group of officers as a platoon to do training simulations. It involves a interactive firearm as well. So they're scenario based on the screen, and it takes that to like a next level type of training for the officers. The other big ticket item on there is the fixed position license plate reader. This is a single location plate reader with 4 cameras. Each camera is capable of seeing 3 lanes wide in each direction. And this particular device can read thousands of license plates over the course of a day versus those that are acquired by the ones that are on the cars, which I'm also looking to add to that as well. The location that we were thinking of was the intersection in front of Walmart. We have an awful lot of vehicles that pass through there. This device would provide officers that are working with an immediate recognition of the type of violation that the type of vehicle that goes through that's already in queue from the state to trip notification, whether it's stolen, whether it's involved in some other type of crime spree, and it would give a photograph and a direction of travel. We would know that instantaneously. So it would help with getting violators, but they'll also provide leads as well for investigative stuff. And the patrol-mounted license plate readers, the 2 there for 22,000 would bring our complement to 6, which was my goal. We run 6-man shifts when we're fully staffed, and that would allow us to have 1 plate reader on each car that's out on the road at the time.
The fixed license plate readers, you mentioned violations. Does it only pick up the license plate? Is it picking up? It's not picking up running a stuck with red light or anything like that. That's not the point.
No,
it's only picking up license.
Just picking up license plates.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions for Chief? Okay. Sewer fund.
Sure. I'll mention the sewer rate study and I'll let Charlie talk about the building. For a while now, I felt like the rate structure that we have for sanitary sewer charges has worked fine. It hasn't changed over the years since I've been here, other than the amounts, per use have been increased over time. But the differentiation of rates between the type of use on property is basically the essential structure. And there are some uses that are based upon meter readings. So I think we ought to take a look at that basic structure of the uses that are in the rate structure and try to, as best we can, determine that there's a fair distribution of those sewer costs being applied through the rate structure against all the various uses in the township. So not looking for more dollars, but to make sure that the rate structure is more fair.
Mm-hmm.
And Charlie can address the sewer dump pit.
Purchased a roll dumpster and a little bit for big gap that's dumps into the times where dumpster, and then meantime it's got to be ordered or licensed to have it pulled to the landfill, but it has to stay covered at all times. So running pumps. A heavy rubber part of the dumpster is constantly it's time to dry out. So you've got the analytical labs in, test this stuff, force you to contact so what we want to do is put it undercover. Don't have to have this rubber part on top. You get once you dry out further, go that.
Where's the physical location of it? Is it near the?
It's right here, the salt bin, it's on
Yeah.
that white fence.
Yeah, yeah.
When the building was first built, we had about by 15 had and do that. Probably take us an hour and a half to the truck. This year's 15 reduction. We all know. Like that, all the maintenance on private tanks. So there's line flush, always in its tank. It goes and some will stay, some will go to the landfill, but it's metal that they dry. Got it. And the total cost there was about $50,000. Fine.
Okay.
Questions? Charlie? Okay, Capital Reserve Fund.
So many of these projects you've seen before, and we continue to work on them. Several of them are related to the Lincoln Highway streetscape implementation, the Rockvale Trail project. We had sort of taken a pause there, waiting for redevelopment plans to come from that property, and that hasn't happened. So we feel like because of the funding source from the RCAP dollars that we have there, we need to get that project going and done so that we don't lose those dollars. So that project is still budgeted there. The Lincoln Highway Phase 3 project, that's the project essentially from the Dutch Wonderland Tanger intersection going east, probably to about Bowman Road at this point. We do have about 2.6 million in multimodal fund dollars have been allocated to that, some of it from Commonwealth financing and some of it directly from PennDOT. And then we have our own contribution towards that project as well. So that's included there in the budget. Walnut Street Extension and the Lancaster Heritage Pathway related expenses, we're not directly related into as far as funding the design and permitting or the construction, but we do have costs associated with reviewing of the plans, and there may be some other extraneous costs there that we want to make sure we've got some dollars ready to go there. Strasbourg Pike Oakview Road Trail project, putting the numbers in the budget now to make sure that the capital reserve is prepared for that. We're not going to spend all these dollars next year. We're just going to be getting started into the design work there. And by the time we get through all the design effort, the construction isn't likely to happen until probably 23. The old Philadelphia Pike signal system, we were successful in getting Green Light Go funding. Charlie applied for, and that was funded. It had been funded pre-pandemic, and they PennDOT pulled the dollars when the pandemic hit. So we applied for it again. They funded it again. So it's a total of 272, 217 of that is with Green Light Go, and the remainder is our contribution. So this would be the signals from Greenfield Road to Oakview Road on Old Philadelphia Pike. Gibbons Park at Knowles Mill Park Design Engineering. One of the things that the Park Board wanted to focus on next year was getting design work done. We have a conceptual plan out of the regional park plan that was done. So now the next step would be to get into actual engineering, designing those improvements for that park facility. So we'd like to get that in this year's budget. Last thing we want to, I was making note of was an access door to the attic area above the admin PD building. I don't know if you can picture, there's a flat part of the roof on the back side of the building that the air conditioning equipment's on top of. And we'd like to put a doorway that comes this direction. I don't know, what is that, north? Into the attic space, so that when we do need to get in there, it's much easier to access. That essentially
Basically, yeah, we've had some pipes that needed replaced in our our dry system in the sprinkler, and they're having to cut the pipe in half to get it up through the crawl spaces.
Wow.
Be a lot easier access than laying on your stomach on top of the safe on a concrete lid to try to get up its road.
Question, Corey, or for Ralph.
Sure.
Strasbourg Pike Oakview Road Trail. Is that 2 million rev? Is that in the proposed revenues that are listed for capital reserve fund?
It's $2 million in expense. We got a little over $1 million in smart growth funding to support that.
So
So the other million would come out of capital reserve.
Okay. So there's in that cap reserve projected fund balance at 12/31/22 of 1.2. $1 million of that is for the Strasbourg Pike Oakview Road Trail. I'm you're saying that the construction won't happen in 2022.
Right.
I'm just wondering where are those funds sitting
Right. They would be in the capital reserve fund
at the end of
balance.
2022?
Correct.
Okay. But we're not overspending that. We have those dollars. Okay.
We would.
Okay.
Other questions related to capital reserve fund? Huh? Keep going, highway.
Parkland Capital Reserve, that's money that we get from the payments in lieu of land dedication from developers. So those dollars have to be spent within 3 years of when they're deposited with the township. So we've got about $9,100 that has to get spent so that it's not callable by the developers. So we're going to propose to purchase some playground equipment. Anything you want to elaborate there, Charlie?
Now, we have a park superintendent is certified playground inspector. And about 3 years ago, he did inspect it and they said we probably have about 3 to 5 years life out of this stuff yet. So we're going to use some of these funds to purchase some and then possibly in 2023 suit the rest of it out.
Okay.
Highway aid? Unless there's questions about Parkland. Highway aid.
Good.
Charlie, I guess I'll let you go over those.
Okay, we do have 2 rollers. We just replaced one back in 2018, if I'm right. Our oldest one is a 2002. It's about seen its life. So we want to try to replace that. The cost was $41,000. They're going to offer around $10,000 for a trade-in. So again, our maintenance program is pretty good out there. Multiple roads for oil and chip, Rockvale Road from Strasbourg Pike to Bowman Road. And also our paving road maintenance. This is based off of our robotics system that we purchased about a year or 2 ago, probably 2 years by this time. Hempstead Road from Greenfield to Old Homestead. What we want to do is stop short of that Greenfield Road, Hempstead Road intersection due to highs work that they're going to need to do out there. Willow Road from Pine Drive to New Holland Pike, Parkview, and at this point, Millport Road may come off the list because I started talking with West Lampeter and they're looking at 2023 doing Millport Road.
So you do it at the same time.
And it
Doing
makes,
paving to Millport Road?
yes.
No way we can work with West Lampeter from the township line out to Lampeter Road. I mean, that road 10, 15 years ago when Keystone and Charter both owned both sides, I thought,
Yeah.
Oh, when
we're
they
going to actually get that road finished.
Yeah.
You drive that road, in the township and it's widened because of Southview and Southridge and it's widened. We've got curbs on it and it goes back to a cow path.
Yeah.
All over.
I can bring that up in conversation with West Lampeter. Like I said,
Anyway.
we're trying to work with our neighboring townships. If you're
Right.
doing
I think
one,
it's
we'll
great.
hold off. But, it makes
Because-
sense.
Both those properties have now gone back to ag. They're not for sale. You ride a bike on that road or you pass somebody walking and jogging and there is just nothing.
My only concern is it's narrow and people speed on that road already. If you widen there, it's going to be 60 plus.
You go 60 plus there anyway. What are you kidding me?
No.
No, but seriously, coming out of Dave's street, I talked to neighbors that live there, right? That, try to make the right. They're coming up that way. When I'm coming out of, Southbridge, making a left onto Millport, can't see around that corner. Just put a roundabout it.
Look, Millport is
We need to put the signs.
Millport is a major arterial collector road in this urban growth area. I had hopes 15 years ago that we would have the developers work with us on finishing that road. I think we ought to look at putting some money into to finishing Millport Road between East Lampeter and West Lampeter and make it the road that it is. It needs to be.
Superhighway.
It needs to be improved.
Those
That's what's
those two properties in West Lampeter will eventually be developed.
Yeah.
Not in my lifetime or your
Oh,
lifetime.
they will be.
Oh, yeah, they will be.
They were ready to
It's coming.
go years ago.
One just sold for ag again.
We'll do our best to convince West Lampeter that they need to improve their
I
side.
was just saying,
I mean,
it's been
100%
15
of the
years it is.
problem is on that side
15
of the
years.
line.
We developed Southridge and Southgate
West
as
Lampeter.
major, suburban development. And between Lampeter Road and Strasbourg Pike, we have about I don't know what that is, 600 yards of that road that is still not much different than what it was 30, 40 years ago.
Oh, you got
Not
to
in East
stretch.
Lampeter.
What's that?
Not in East Lampeter.
No, East Lampeter's looks like it should.
Worked great.
Well, you got to stretch in East Lampeter from Strasbourg Pike.
To the
To-
dog leg there. the
Just
dog
around the
leg.
first turn there.
The
Yeah,
whole-
that
the whole
dog
way
leg's
up there
terrible.
is the same thing.
Oh,
as
it's
what's being-
terrible. I think we ought to look at taking Millport Road between East Lampeter and West Lampeter and make the commitment to upgrading that infrastructure to what is major suburban development there.
When the developers.
Oh, man. Gonna happen in your lifetime,
I-
mine.
Okay, keep going.
I realize that I failed to include on the oil and chip list, Hartman Station Road from Horseshoe to Creek Hill. And in particular, I know that when we oil and chip roads, sometimes the board gets
I'll begin.
calls about that. So I just want to make sure if you have any concerns about that, or you want us to approach anything differently, these are the roads that are identified in the robotics system as being the ones that need maintenance. So that's why they're listed there.
Yeah, the last item I had there were increasing the line painting efforts due to the board starting to do their traffic calming. When we do pave a development, we get those lines and it seems to be working. The complaints that came shortly after we did Willow Acres have gone away and it's working.
Good. You can do it to Millport Road from the township line to Lampeter. We'll put in some nice lines there. We'll have a bike
We'll
lane.
need a majority vote on that.
It'll slow all the traffic down when we improve that.
Put in a speed bump.
Put in rumble strips right at the end of the road there.
Go for that too. It
No
doesn't
speed
work.
bumps or rumble strips.
Line painting works.
I drive that road too much.
Lines work.
You can't do 65 on there if you have rumble strips.
Not repairing roads is an excellent traffic calming strategy.
Exactly.
Okay, tax increment financing. Is that for the next meeting or is
It
that?
would be for
Okay,
the
we'll
next
skip
meeting.
that other.
The other, I just listed there, the Stormwater Fund, of course, the Sewer Authority will be adopting that. And then the ARPA Fund, I asked to list 596,000. That's just a math calculation of how much we're going to get over 2 years and dividing it by 3 years of spending.
Yep.
The HVAC upgrade for air filtering, that equipment is, as old as the building and probably, could use replacement. Lemsa fire companies, sometimes we get complaints about, front door access the doors being too heavy. So maybe, adding some mechanics to that. The lost revenue replacement, which you've already talked about, which we definitely want to look at. The parks did get heavier use, during COVID. So, there could be some upgrades there that would make sense. Stormwater and water and sewer facilities are one of the things that is fairly clear in the guidance that you could spend money on. So, perhaps some stormwater infrastructure there. This room, we've done pretty good with our, video and sound and, access to your meetings. But, we could probably do some more and do better. So that might be some of the funding that could be used for that. So I listed that as another idea, but we need to, I'd like to get some more guidance, but if we don't get some more guidance, we're going to come up with our best ideas before we ask you to authorize advertising the budgets. And if you guys have any ideas or suggestions that you want us to look into or explore, we're happy to look into those as well.
Comments?
This the ARPA funds?
Yep.
Yeah, the big ones there, if we can fill funds.
Lost revenue stuff.
So dump it all into the fire apparatus fund or the OPEB fund.
If we
which
can, I
did, which
think,
we delayed putting into for 2 years.
right. I think the OPEB is probably a little more problematic than the others. Just because of some of the language that's been in there about, not for pension funds and not for post-retirement stuff. So that one, probably I have more butterflies in my stomach over that one.
Yeah.
The other, hopefully we can justify it.
The other option would be we could create an emergency services fund and dump it into that to use potentially were to drip out or start paying LEMSA out of that.
I'm up for either, a previous conversation we had about it. I'm up for using those funds. If
But
everyone,
emergency services is where I would
Related to that.
prioritize those funds.
Yeah, it sounds like our,
Because they're the ones that were strained too over the last 2 years.
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, regarding EV, I've seen technology where there would actually be a camera here. It would follow whoever's speaking. That's a possible option. I would say look into what we can do cost effectively to make public participation easier and add transparency. Makes sense.
Yeah, I would encourage us, if we can't, even just lower lying fruit there is the microphone system, things that we hear about that
Yeah.
people are saying, they're challenged with what we have at this point. So, yeah, I'm up.
Yeah. Any other direction you're looking for? Good list.
Yeah, I did, list the revenue fund balance
Yeah.
things. Kevin did a spreadsheet, which he normally does with a budget summary, which, shows the totals in terms of what we're expecting or what's at least been listed as far as revenues and expenditures and what we have projected as our fund balance at the end of this year as well as the end of next year based upon what's in the draft. So if there are any questions there, I would tend to agree with what Ethan said earlier in the meeting. There are probably some things we could tweak on revenues in the general fund and maybe, grab some more dollars there to reduce that expense or that difference in revenue and expense in the general fund, but it's not gonna close that gap.
Right.
The big
We do
things-
have, I'm sorry.
If you want to, like a quick hits on there are our real estate tax collection rate. I just run rolling average of the last 10, 11 years. And that'll bump up to 96%. I think you have in there 94%. Transfer tax, I think, could be higher looking at past years and where the market's going and the pricing of the market. I think I'd add 50,000 there. LST, I think, could be a whole $125,000 higher based on where wage growth is going and the employment numbers.
LST
and then-
is just employment, doesn't have anything to do with the pay level.
That's just the standard.
Just, yeah.
But even looking at the past, what we've done in previous years, we've been much higher in our actuals, over 700,000. So 578, I think, is a little low. Sky Zone, we've got dropped. Cables franchise, we're also budgeting, we're renegotiating that. We're budgeting a decrease as we're doing that, which seems a little off, as well as our fines and payments based off of historical. Then the only other one in here is fire alarm fees. I know we've talked about this when this goes into, we've got people running calls that we could avoid. I think we should look at ramping up our fire alarm fees significantly and matching some of our neighboring townships where there's a 3 strikes policy and then they have to reapply.
Okay, we can look at that.
But that gets some more revenue in there as well as also
Kevin has a
decreases
question for you.
costs.
Kevin.
I was just going to say that speaking or in the meeting with Lancaster County Tax Collection Bureau, the head of the bureau, is kind of saying that he was not anticipating the LST to return to like 2019 levels until probably like 2023. He said it's definitely going to increase, but he said it's not going to return to 2018-19
And
levels.
his reason is because of just unemployment levels? Is that why he's?
That, and he was also mentioning with remote work. So he wasn't everything he was saying. He wasn't confident that that was going to return as quickly as.
I disagree with them every year anyway, so.
Ralph, is that it, Kevin? Yeah. On the revenues, the federal entitlements, I missed that part of the conversation. So why are we looking at the 596 versus the 891?
Well, the 891 is what we received. So if we spend more than 700 or 750,000 in federal in any one year, we have to do what's called a single audit. It's somewhat burdensome. They don't look just at how you spent those funds, they look at everything. So I just took the 2 years of the entitlement that we're going to get, divided it by the 3 years that we have to spend it.
Okay.
Came up with 596. That's
I
all
missed that part. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, good. Yep.
Cool.
Thank you.
Okay. Hutch, anything else?
No, appreciate
Yeah.
appreciate your
Great
time
job.
and input.
Staff. Thank you, Hutch.
Yeah,
for taking
thank
us
you,
through it.
staff. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
I mean, I would agree with Ethan, we can be a little more aggressive with our estimates on the revenue side. We're always conservative on that.
Sure.
And,
We have, over the past couple of years, because of, what we did in cutting back on expenses, we've done,
Yeah, you did a
revenues
great
have been greater than expenditures, so
Right,
the fund balance has gone up.
right. I mean, you guys are all great managers. You manage the business over the 12 months, right? We just don't set a budget and
Right.
run blindly. We have conversations and manage the business. So, okay, great. Any questions for the board from any staff?
Just one thought. and it's
Yeah,
not-
please.
Not that I want to add to the budget, it doesn't have to be this year, but we're in the business of serving the community. And I don't recall ever us having an assessment done of how well we're doing. Companies do assessments of how well they're doing their service.
Surveys.
Is that something we should consider as a township to see? I knew we do a good job, but maybe we have some blind spots where we could improve. It would be worthwhile sometime put in the budget to have an assessment done of how well we're doing as a township. Just an idea. I don't know what that would cost. But
I agree. I think at least I've talked about in the past of having a public dashboard, but then having public input on what we should be tracking. What are the most important issues? Is it traffic? Is it fire?
Great idea, Glenn. I think getting.
A mailed survey and an online survey, I think would be worth pursuing.
Absolutely. We take for granted that we're a small local government. We kind of operate below the radar and, the public doesn't really take an interest in it and they don't come to our meetings.
Well, that would imply we're doing a good job because they're not here yelling at us. So,
Right.
Or applies doing a horrible
Yeah.
job. They're like, they're not gonna listen anyway.
Yeah. I think it probably means more that they really don't think about it as being an essential part of their lives. And we all know it is. It is. And
it's
I
just
think,
an idea. It's
No,
something
I
to think
think it's
about.
I
great.
like it.
Yeah.
I like
I mean,
it.
we do it in our business. I'm sure
Oh, yeah.
we all
All
do
the time.
it. You learn a lot, Yeah. Yeah, sorry, Mike.
I just want to say it was very well organized. Appreciate the input from the department heads and great discussion on the deficit. You have to keep looking at ideas. I can't believe there's other townships that haven't used that feedback, some tools and feedback, about level of service, things like that. That's another good idea.
Yeah, there are some, there's none locally that I know, but there are some municipalities that have used the feedback and then a public dashboard that tracks that over time to great advantage.
Sounds good. Okay. Any other business for the good of the order? Okay, motion to adjourn for this meeting?
Make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Any other public comment? Any other board comment? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. We're adjourned. I use the restroom.
Yeah, I was going to
Now we got the
suggest the same thing.
What's that?
Hello and welcome to the East Lampeter Township Public Meeting. All participants are now informed that this meeting is being recorded. This meeting is also being offered virtually utilizing Zoom, which is a cloud-based platform for remote video and audio conferencing. The Zoom application is free to the public. The general public is therefore able to join the meeting by connection through the internet or by calling in by phone. The public is also able to observe the meeting on the Township's YouTube channel. Please continue to check the Township website calendar for any updates related to these public meetings. Agendas for these public meetings will also be available on the Township's website. Please be reminded that this meeting is being video and audio recorded and will be posted to the Township's YouTube channel for viewing. The meeting will now proceed with the chairman calling the meeting to order and identifying all other members present in the meeting room and those joining the meeting via Zoom. The chairman will then confirm those members joining by Zoom can be heard.
Okay, ready? All right, good evening. Welcome to the East Lampeter Township Industrial Commercial Development Authority Budget Review Meeting. My name is John Blowers. I'm the chair. There are no members on Zoom. No one from the public on Zoom, it looks like. Okay. All members of the authority are in the room. Please join me in saying the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
No members of the public in the room. No members of the public on Zoom, correct? Okay, all right, thank you. Staff, Ralph.
Yes, so we prepared a draft budget for the ICDA, which is the TIF fund, the Tax Increment Financing Fund. It is through the tax increment financing that funds are generated for activities of the Industrial Commercial Development Authority. We have at the end of this year, we're expecting to have a fund balance of 555, correct?
502.
And have continuing income coming in there from, well, we have 4 properties that are subject to the increment at this point. Proposing to budget 3 projects, basically the gateway feature on the east side of the corridor, which would be a location facing westbound traffic on east, at a point east of Route 896 intersection. To be honest, the $100,000 is somewhat of a guess as to what it would cost to, acquire the necessary easement to place the feature, how big it will be, what it will be made out of, how it will be constructed, whether or not there will be any involvement with PennDOT related to that. So that was my best guess as to how much might be spent in that regard. We'd like to get back to working on creating the business improvement district for the corridor, which was another recommendation of the streetscape plan. We tried a few years ago to get that done, and the vote failed. So I think we do have a more complete story to tell the property owners out there about why a business improvement district would be helpful. So there will be some expenses associated with that. So I want to budget for those expenses. And then lastly, since the authority did choose a brand for the corridor, basically Lincoln Highway Lancaster being that brand, to start on some form of implementation for that brand. And I don't really know exactly what that would look like, whether that's going to be, working with, setting up somewhat in combination with the business improvement district, website, some sort of marketing effort, creation of merchandise with the brand on it, So I really haven't started to explore all that yet, but, you know, wanted to have some dollars available to start exploring that.
The proposed revenues, the proposed expenditures are 197.5. What's the difference? 120 right there.
Right.
From the fund, the proposed
Right.
expenditures are 197.5. Just
Do you happen to know offhand, Kevin?
sorry, say it again.
That would do it.
TIF project consultant.
Oh, that, yeah, the consultant effort that we have underway right now, the remaining cost associated with that, yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
75K. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Questions, board? Any questions about? Aaron, staff, additional?
Just a comment, I think moving the brand implementation, I'd probably either shift after a business improvement district's created or shift the funds towards helping get that created. Because a bid would be the one that would really drive that brand implementation. And I think should be the ones in the main driver's seat of figuring out what the next steps are for how we build that brand.
Like, sure. Have the members of the bid.
Frankly, 10,000 is not gonna get you much from a marketing, like that might get you.
Yeah.
We were very close the last time.
Very,
Yeah,
very.
but if we put some dollars into holding more events and actually talking with the business owners out there, I think we could get a lot greater buy-in. So I think if we put the dollars towards building the buy-in and doing more of an education with those folks who are making that decision and would serve on that board, I think that would go a much longer way towards getting that community buy-in.
If I'm correct, we had a champion in the district who was really looking to help us champion this one of the business owners. Who's Steve?
Well, Calpesh at the Wyndham was
Yeah.
very excited about it.
That's right.
and, willing to help.
Yeah. I like the way Ethan framed that, you know, is let's look for ways to build in some events or some, you know, some messaging and communication there and build a collaboration. I think.
I wouldn't want to have a bid that just barely made it.
Yeah.
I'd like to get a much greater degree of
everybody.
buy-in.
Don, what was the year we tried that the last time? Is that?
Well, it's been 3 years.
It was, yeah, I think it was 2017.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Oh, my
Yeah.
gosh. Oh, yeah. Okay. And you know, there were one or two businesses that were there at the time that are no longer out there who were actively working against it. Those individuals. I don't
First, remember, was there a reason for being against it? Kind of forget. Do you remember?
They didn't
it's a
want
fee.
trees
Part of it.
or it's a fee,
Yeah.
but they
Well, they-
control how the money's
They
spent.
didn't want the fee.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah, I know what I see, you know.
There were some concerns about
The streetscape
some of the
plan as
design
well.
elements in the streetscape plan. Narrowing of the travel lanes was a concern.
Okay.
We've
Yeah.
done that now, so.
So some of the bigger concerns we've addressed, have already been done, and they can see the results. And I think
Yeah.
that we're a little further along. It's less
Yeah.
conceptual. It's more of, hey,
Yeah.
we did that thing.
We're in phase 3. You know, we've
Yeah.
done some other stuff that, you know, let's present that as, hey, we're making it happen. Look what we could do with you guys now framing a full bid.
Yeah, I think we definitely have a better story to tell now than we did 4 years ago.
Good. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Questions, comments? Okay. Hearing none.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Corey, second by Ethan. Those in favor?